Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate Topics. We are your hosts, Tywauna Wilson, my name Lona Small, and Stephanie Whitehead. We're so excited about this opportunity to talk to you about everything lab. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts bring you topics related to the lab to help you in your skills as laboratorians and help with leadership skills and help you excel inside and outside the lab. I'm very excited about today's show, and today we're going to talk about Leadership 101, how to move from just managing and start leading. So I know there's usually a lot of confusion about being a manager, and nowadays there's a lot of talk about leadership, and sometimes people get really confused. So we wanted to take this time today to have a discussion about what's the difference between a leader and a manager. What's the difference when you're managing and when you're leading? And I know there are fundamental differences, but why is this important to know? And I think this is important to know because a lot of you are either aspiring to go into management roles, or some people may say leadership roles, and it may be confusing for you and you're not sure exactly what direction to take. And right now we have many managers trying to navigate their way, and there's a lot of confusion. And so I think that it's important to be able to know the path in which you need to go in order to get to the goal that you're trying to reach. And in defining this, it will help a lot of leaders and potential leaders to develop the skills necessary to succeed in their jobs. And, you know, when you think of, I think of trying to get to a certain point, and say, for instance, there's a fork in the road and you're trying to make a decision. If you choose the wrong path, of course, you're not going to get to the goal you're trying to accomplish. So it's very important to define the path in which you need to take to get to that goal that you're trying to accomplish. And so that's why I think it's important to differentiate what management is versus leadership. But my co-host will probably have different viewpoints or different things that they would need to add. Tywauna, what's your thought on that?
Yes, I think there are fundamental differences between both management and leadership. And it makes me think back to a story about Dick and Maurice. So in 1937, Dick and Maurice were brothers who opened a small drive-in restaurant in Pasadena, California. So this is a time where people were in their cars, and that was the big thing, to be in their cars and go to drive-up type of a restaurant. So Dick and Maurice, they had their tiny restaurant. It was very successful. And then in the 1940s, they went on to expand. So they went on to open up an additional store. They went from $200,000 in sales to over $350,000 in sales. And if you don't know, Dick and Maurice are the founders of McDonald's hamburgers. Well, in 1954, the brothers hooked up with a gentleman by the name of Ray Kroc. And Ray Kroc was an avid patron of the restaurants. He thought that they had a great business model. They were doing big things, and he saw this restaurant as being more than 2 stores, but being able to be a global operation, being able to be one on every corner, if you will. So he had this vision of taking it nationwide, and listen, this is getting ready to be the next big thing. And so he struck up a deal with the brothers to buy out their system for franchising purposes. And so from 1955 to 1959, he opened up over 100 stores. And why do I tell you that story? Because it reminds me of management and leaders and leadership. See, Dick and Maurice, they were very good restaurant owners. They were able to run their business. They understood their business. They were able to make the systems efficient, cut costs, increase profits, and they were good at that. So they were good at those processes. But they couldn't see past those 2 stores. They didn't see the McDonald's hamburgers on every single corner. They couldn't see that. And so it took Ray Kroc, who was a leader, to really see that vision and take the McDonald's to another level, which is now what we know as the McDonald's corporation that you see on every single corner here in the U.S. and globally. He had that vision to lead the organization and to cooperate in the corporation to the next level. Dick and Maurice were great managers. Ray Kroc was a great leader. And so that's why I say it's very different, especially when we're working with our laboratory teams. It's going to take a leader to be able to take the team to the next level. Your managers, of course, when you think about it, you're working in processes, projects, tasks. But leaders are really about the vision of the organization. They're about the vision of the people and really inspiring their people to be better. And so I'm all about practical, and that's why I like that story about Dick and Maurice and Ray Kroc, because to me, it just really makes you think about the differences between managers and leaders. And I'm sure if you've had some managers and leaders across your path, you've seen a big difference between the two. Stephanie, you got anything to follow up on that?
I think that was a really good story. I appreciate that. And I think, that really brings home the message of what we want to convey today in this podcast and this teaching, helping people understand those differences and really understanding that leadership is not a position or a rank, it's a choice. So even if you do not have the title that you think would put you in the place of leadership, say supervisor or lead tech or manager or director, you can still be a leader in your area. Like Tywauna said, it's about creating the vision of the future and getting a strategy to get there. But not only that, if you don't have that title or that ability, or you don't have that power to create that vision or have that strategy in place, if you're a tech on the bench, leadership for your shift might be about creating an environment that motivates your staff to do the right thing, to, have great turnaround times, to have great quality of work, and be assisting your clinical team and your nurses and your doctors with patient care. Understanding that, when things go right, you may have to give away the credit and say, we did this as a team. When things go wrong, you may be the one accepting the responsibility so you guys can get to a better working place and get to a better compliance rate. But just really understanding that you don't have to have the title to be a leader. Leadership is a choice. And understanding that in the laboratory there are so many processes that we do that you can apply these differences to different things that happen in the laboratory. For instance, many people use the term change management. Well, you can use that synonymous with change leadership, and change management being, making sure that a set of processes are aligned and making sure that things are flowing in an organizational way so a project finishes from beginning to end. But change leadership is looking at the big picture of that project and the future state of that project, and making sure that we lead our way to success through the end of that project. So always look at a place where you can shift from management to leadership. Sometimes it may not be bad to manage, especially if you have a small team or a new team, or a set of new people, you may have to have a heavier hand in tracking operations and monitoring things and making sure that you're managing things very closely. But you always want to have that good balance, because too much management or micromanagement can be demotivating to your staff. So you always want to have that good balance between, where do I need to manage, where do I need to make sure that things are in line, and where do I need to inspire and lead.
Yeah, I really love that, and I love what Stephanie said in terms of balance, because when you think about it, we need both. But when I think of managing, I think more like what Tywauna said. You're managing processes, structures, budgets, costs, even quality. You talk about quality management. So with management, you're basically managing things. And if you're too focused on just managing things, you can't control everything, and especially you can't control everything on your own. So the difference would be for a leader. Leader is more an influencer, so you're more, if you see yourself as a managing and you want to manage people, of course that's a failure there. Yes, as a manager, you may be managing cost or quality, but you need to be able to influence your people in order to accomplish these tasks. And so it's kind of a mindset, because when you're leading and influencing people, you're actually empowering them, and you're empowering them to grow and to achieve personal goals and sometimes organizational goals. So say, for instance, when you think of quality management, last week's podcast, I gave an example of how to challenge your team to grow. And yes, part of quality management may include surveys or audits, but if you're just focused on just auditing and not caring about the people involved, you're going to lose the people, and you won't get the support that you need. So say you want to manage a process because you're managing things, but you're basically leading people. So if you want to do an audit. Last week I gave an example of this person that was doing an audit. And while they were doing an audit, as a leader, my job was to encourage that person in order to grow. So by challenging that person to do more, it was more an encouragement for growth versus having that hard hand down and say, we're not meeting our targets, and this is what we're going to do. Somebody's going to be punished, and we're blaming, and we're not empowering. We don't have as Tywauna and Stephanie say, a clear vision of where we want to go as a team. So yes, it's important to manage, but we have to move away from just focusing on managing these processes. And once we start empowering people, we'll accomplish these goals that we set in terms of cost and budget and processes. If we focus on the people, then that's where we get the support in accomplishing these management goals.
Absolutely.
So then, it goes into some of the perils of just managing. And, I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to talk about some of the disadvantage. If you're focused on just managing things and not leading your people to accomplish these goals, what are some of the perils that we could encounter?
Yeah, sure. So depending on the team or the organization, managing to the level of micromanagement, like I said before, can be demotivating to your staff versus really leading them and helping them feel motivated and inspired to achieve their goals. Leadership is a skill, just like anything else. It's a practical practicable. You have to practice it, and so you can get better at it, and you can learn how to better handle different situations and continue to lead through those instead of reverting back to previous habits you might have had. But it's a practical, practicable, learnable skill, just like parenting. Everybody has the capacity to perhaps be parents, but we are learning as we're going through the journey of parenthood how to be better parents and how to parent the children that we have if you have children. And leading is no different. So when you're looking at your staff, you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to intangible results with your staff that may exhibit that you're doing too much managing rather than enough leading. And I'll give you some examples of those. So one of the most common intangible results that you can monitor is employee satisfaction and job happiness. So when you're micromanaging and constantly monitoring your workers that you supervise, you could be causing them undue stress. You could be causing them to slow down their work process, not doing their work process to their fullest potential, or encouraging them to make more mistakes than they need to. And this obviously can lead to employees being more dissatisfied or not as happy at their job, and maybe more complaints, maybe less communication, maybe less cohesiveness amongst your staff. Another measure you can also look at is your employee retention or absenteeism. And so if you've constantly got people coming in and leaving your team, a really high turnover rate or a really high absentee rate, people calling in all the time, not really feeling loyal or committed to their job or their team members or their schedule, that may be a sign that there's something going on in the environment and that people aren't feeling inspired or led to be a part of an overall team. Most workers are turned off by micromanagers, and if you've ever been micromanaged in any job that you've had, it doesn't matter whether you're in the laboratory or you're working at the mall, it just doesn't feel good. It makes you feel as a worker that you don't have the independence or the creativity or the self-drive to go ahead and get the job that you were hired to do. So a primary motivator for most workers is going to be autonomy, for their supervisor or their manager to trust them once they're deemed competent, to trust them to do the job that you've hired them to do. Again, I would look at maybe even your adherence to compliance. If you've got to stay on your staff every single month to make sure certain quality checks are done or certain things are done, rather than you leading them and them feeling the obligation or them feeling like they have the ownership and the responsibility to innately make sure these things are done, then you may be doing more managing than leading. Also, an unofficial indicator to me would be also the progression of your team. Leaders are always looking at how can I progress my team? Where are there areas for me to grow a person, for me to mentor a person, for me to elevate and assist somebody with taking on more job duties when they have that capacity? And so if all of your team is staying at the same rate, there's no career progression, and we've talked about that in previous podcasts, there's no area for growth or growth potential, then that means that you're pretty much just being in charge of people instead of allowing people to be in charge of themselves. So Tywauna, did you have anything to add about maybe some of the pitfalls that can come from over-managing and not leading?
Absolutely. When we think about some of those pitfalls, and, sometimes being in management, people like to micromanage. And unfortunately, especially with today's changing environment, there's just not time to be micromanaging and carry the vision amongst the organization. But just to backtrack just a little bit, when I think about the manager and leadership, and think about not just the perils, but actually those manager and leader competencies, which really are important in distinguishing those different. So as we was getting prepared for today's podcast, I came across a book by John Cotter, and that book is A Force for Change. And John Cotter clearly outlines some of these differences. And I think understanding these differences, especially with the competencies that are unique to a manager and a leader, definitely will help us not step into some of those pitfalls that happens in management and leadership. But some of those competencies is a manager has a short-range perspective, whereas a leader has a long-range perspective. So they're able to look at the vision, able to look at where we're going to take the laboratory or organization in the next 5-10 years. A manager plans how and when, versus a leader asks what and why. See, great leaders, good leaders ask great questions. So there's power in the questions that you ask. Managers imitate others. So you want to be like your boss, or you want to be like your director or somebody else that you have seen, versus a leader, they originate. They are original. Think about your Steve Jobs. He was an originator, and he was able to take Apple to the next level. Now everybody has some type of Apple device, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. Managers, they accept the status quo. This is how we've done it. This is how we've always done it. Let's move and get this task accomplished based off of that, versus a leader challenges the status quo. I know we've done it this way for 5-10 years, but it doesn't mean we need to continue to do it that way. It doesn't mean that this is the best way possible. The manager is focused on doing things correctly, versus a leader focuses on doing the correct thing, and sometimes that can be a challenge. That could be a challenge, and sometimes as a leader, you're not always well-liked when you have to do the correct thing. A manager is based, the power is based on position or authority, whereas a leader, the power is based on personal influence. So there are some definite key differences, and I know as technical people that transition into management, we demonstrate skill in our technical competence, what we do very well on the bench, our being very skilled in microbiology or hematology or blood bank chemistry, versus a leader is able to demonstrate the skill in selling the vision. So it's a very different than, task, manager, tactics, leader, strategy. And sometimes that transition and even the way that you communicate is different. When you're at the manager level and thinking as such, you're using conversation that may be more transactional, do this and then this, versus using transformational communication style where you're really inspiring and really caring about your people. And really that is the single most important thing, because what leaders know and understand is they know that their people is the most valuable asset that an organization has. And so if your people are the most valuable asset on your team, in your organization, why wouldn't you try to develop and continue to grow your asset? And leaders understand that. They understand that it's not just about meeting this project deadline. And so there's a lot of practical competencies, a lot of practical examples as well. But the biggest thing is, executing that plan. And so, when people transition from frontline to manager, sometimes that is difficult. I recently had it in one of my workshops where I had person that transitioned. They were, had all of the education, they had a background in medical lab science, transitioned to leadership. They had a master's degree, had a doctoral degree. So they had as much education as you can have. They had it. But now in their role, they had to be the visionary. They had to empower and instill the value in their team. And that part was a challenge because as techs, we're taught to be technically sound, to be technically good, to be able to give technical expertise. But when you have to transition to working and being about the business of people. Sometimes they don't teach you that in a book. They don't teach you that in your educational programs. And that was one of the things that my student said was that, I'm having a difficult time because I'm stuck in the technical, but I need to be about the people. And that's where we have to know and understand that there are these core differences in competencies that are required. I love stories, so all about the practical. But I'll kind of leave with this little funny story that I came across that kind of speaks to me about management and leadership, and when we talk about the way that we communicate. And so it says this man was in a hot air balloon, was traveling, but realized he was lost. So he descended close to the ground. He's in his hot air balloon. I'm lost. Let me get close to the ground. He spotted a lady, and he yelled out, "Excuse me, can you help me?" And he said, "I promised a friend I would meet them, but I don't know where I am." The woman replied, "You're in a hot air balloon, hovering approximately 30 feet above the ground, and give him his longitudinal and latitude position." "You must be an engineer," said the balloonist. "I am." "How did you know?" He said, "Well, all the info you gave me is technically correct, but I have no idea what to make of your information, and the fact is I'm still lost. Frankly, you have not been much help at all. In fact, you have helped delay my trip." The woman below responded, "You must be in management." "I am," replied the balloonist. "How did you know?" "Well," said the woman, "you don't know where you are or where you are going. You have risen to where you are due to a large quantity of hot air. You made a promise in which you have no idea how to keep and expect people beneath you to solve your problem. The fact is, you are in the same position you were in before we met, and somehow you have made that my fault." So I thought that was a cute story.
That's funny.
I thought that was a cute story about, managers and leaders, and that, sometimes in our communication and how we communicate, we could be given directions or asking questions that aren't clear. She's like, I answered exactly what you asked me, but you wasn't clear on where you needed to go. So now you've made a promise that you cannot keep, and now that's my fault.
Yes.
So
that is so cute. That's very funny. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's important to realize that on your team you have to have both. You have to have a person that can set a big vision. You have to have a person that is constantly looking toward the future. What is the new test coming out? What are the new instrumentations coming out? What are the new automation systems coming out? Where can we fit this? What do we need to look at in terms of our staffing? How can we add to our business? You got to have that person who has that big vision, but you do have to also have people that are working the front lines and that are taking care of the day-to-day task and operations. Everybody can't be managing, or else you will have no, strategy for how to move into the future, but everybody can't be focused on the future because then nobody will be focused on a task for the day. So there does have to also be balance in the team. We don't want the listeners to think, okay, well, all of us need to be, the leaders. You do have to have those people who are managing. You just need to understand what your role is. Right. And within your role, you need to understand what the balance is. And then, like Tywauna said, when you shift from a role, when you get promoted or you get a new position and you shift from a role that requires you to be more of a leader than be more of a manager, when you can let go of some of those management tasks, you expand your capacity to take on more responsibility, and you expand your capacity to do things better. But you also have to focus on making sure that you have a team that you can trust, that you can have leading conversations with, that you can have guidance conversations with, and then you can trust them to move forward with all of the details in the day-to-day to make sure that those tasks get done.
So true. And I think as a leader, I see that as kind of a growth process. As a manager, I suppose you're just following certain steps. You're not thinking on your own. You're following certain steps. These are some of the procedure we have to follow in order to keep our budgets or keep our costs down. And these are the quality management steps that we have to do. These are the processes that we have to do. So you're basically just following a kind of maybe a, what would I say, a menu. And as a leader, you're basically growing on your own, and it starts with personal growth. As a leader, you have to have, as we discussed, clear vision, but you also have to have certain values, because without these values, you cannot make independent decisions. And so as a leader, you have to have values, and your team would have to have certain values. And you have to be able to encourage teamwork, because without your team, you cannot grow. As a manager, you're basically on your own, because you're doing everything. You're monitoring everyone. You're monitoring every process. You're overdoing everything on your own. But as a leader, now you have so many other people doing the work. So you're expanding on your vision when you're a leader. So as a leader, it's so important to be that role model. So basically what you're doing, you're modeling the way that you want your team to go, and it's a compounding effect where everyone have that desire to do more for your team, because you're encouraging them, you're motivating them, you're telling them that you believe in them, so you have more people doing that work when you're leading. Basically, you're that influence, so of course you have to be a role model, and then you have more collaboration. So when we're talking about some of the perils of being just a manager, some of it is the whole idea of a taskmaster. When you're a taskmaster, once you're not around, the work don't get done. And so there's a lot of frustration when you're a manager. Even though you may have good intentions, you're frustrated and you don't understand why I'm following the menu. I'm following this guidebook, but I'm not getting the results. And I've had so many managers come to me, and they're frustrated with either staff that are disgruntled, they're frustrated with the turnover, and they think that they're doing all the right things, but because they're so focusing on themselves and the things that they need to do in terms of the status quo, then the people don't feel empowered, because it's not about the people. So when you move away from just the task and move away from you and start focusing on building your team, building other people, but before you start building other people, of course, you have to build yourself. So you're comfortable with letting go of that ego. You have enough confidence in empowering other people to get the work done, and feeling comfortable that I may not know one thing, but it's okay because other members of my staff know how to do it. So you get so much more done, even though you may not be competent in so many areas. It's okay to let go and let someone else that has the competence do the work, and of course you're rewarding and you're encouraging. So that's, while we're talking about the perils, you can see the contrast with high turnover versus people want to do more because there are opportunities for growth, for disgruntled team members versus people who are happy to be able to use their competence and use their skills, people who feel happy because they themselves can empower others. So you have one member of your team empowering other members of your team, and you don't have to be there. You don't have to be there to be doing the work because you have already empowered someone else to carry on that goal. So, there's just so many perils, and I know that it's so important to discuss this because many times the perils are there and we don't understand why. And especially in our lab industry right now, where we are not attracting enough people, it's so important to understand these leadership competence and what to do in order to empower, attract. So it's so important to be that role model. It's so important to have that vision, and it's important to allow other people to lead. So they're leading along with you.
Absolutely. And I would say as takeaways from the discussion is definitely work on, as we know, that leadership and growth happens daily, not in a day. So if you are thinking about management versus leadership, think about those competencies in both aspects that you need to improve upon. So if you know you're in management and you're going to have to do projects and be responsible for budgets and those technical tasks, make sure that you continue to try to grow those competencies. If you, as far as a leader, and you know you're going to have to be able to lead a team, empower your people, inspire your people, work on those competencies that fall more so in the leadership realm. When I think about this, I think about emotional intelligence, those, as they call them, people skills, soft skills. My husband and I had a conversation not too long ago about a role. He got a new position, and so his boss at the time said, well, what is one thing that I could have done better? And so my husband told him that, well, you're not personable, as he said. He said, everything about you is transactional. It's about sales, quotas, deadlines, the business, making more sales. It's all transactional. He said, nothing about you says that you care about me. You don't care about me. You don't care about my family. You don't care about anything that has to my growth. If it's not about the business, then you're not interested. And he said, and what makes it, he said, I don't like working for a person like that doesn't care about me. He said, I'm good with the sales and all of that, and I'll work over and beyond for you if I knew you cared about me. But since I don't know that you care about me, that I'm not going to be able to go. If you need something extra, I'm not going to, bend over backwards to try to do that. And so that's one of the things that I would want the listeners to know is that if you know that you're used to talking in a very transactional way with your colleagues and your employees, and you don't know anything about them, don't care, or maybe I won't say don't care, but perception is reality. So if you're not checking in with them, the perception is that you don't care. So work on ways in which you can be transformational versus transactional. Do you care about your people? Right now, at the time of this recording, we're still in a pandemic. So people have life going on all around them. So that would be one of the big takeaways that I would say is growth happens daily, not in a day. Continue working on those competencies in which you know that you have some opportunities to improve. And if you work on them today and keep working on and add little by little by little, just like the stock market, then it will increase, the value will increase over time. What about you, ladies? What would be a takeaway?
One of the takeaways that I would suggest, just piggyback on what you said, is, there's a saying that we have just in administration or in leadership or management that people don't leave their job, they leave their boss. And so I would piggyback on what Tywauna said is, people sometimes, even if they don't like the task that they're doing, they will feel loyal to their team, they'll feel loyal to the boss, and they'll stay and they'll work harder or they'll do additional things because they feel like, my team needs me to do this. And so one of the big takeaways I would have is get to know your team and how they operate and learn what motivates them. so you can continue to drive them on the motivators that they have. Start listening and try to be the last to speak. Listen to your team. If somebody has an idea, let your team speak before you offer things up, so you can allow others to contribute and allow others to feel like they're being heard. And then also, like we've said, this isn't something that you just come out of the gate and you're perfect at. You don't know what perfection looks like unless you experience imperfection, and then you learn from your imperfection so you can continuously grow and try to be perfect. So learn from your mistakes along the way, but also recognize if you make a mistake, recognize that you had a problem or you had, something that you can improve on, and take the accountability and opportunity to learn from those actions and to make yourself a better leader every day. Lona, what takeaways do you have?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking about how would our listeners know where they are? And maybe as a process improvement person, I'm thinking, how could they assess their current state? And I think that it would be good to do an assessment to look at, what am I doing now? Am I operating as more as a manager or as a leader? And we mentioned a lot of the different characteristics of a manager, and also the listener could also look that up and just check it off and say, am I operating more as a manager or a leader? And just look at that state and make a plan to start changing those behaviors and work towards learning different competencies, skills. Maybe say I'm going to work on just one leadership skill for this week or this month and try to master that. And then start adding more to it as you go along, because it's not going to be an overnight change, but it's an important change. So do a current assessment of yourself and choose a new competency in leadership and work on that and keep building on that.
All right. Well, in summary, thank you to our listeners who tuned in today. Always look for an opportunity to improve on what you're doing in your department, and give us your feedback. Give us your comments. We'd love to hear what you think about this podcast and others, and more things that you would like to hear from us. Thank you for tuning in and checking out another episode of Elaborate Topics with our host, Tywauna Wilson, Lona Small, and myself, Stephanie Whitehead. If you like what you heard today and you want to listen to our previous shows, subscribe to our episodes at directimpactbroadcasting.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Remember to email us at elaboratetopics@directimpactbroadcasting.com to let us know if you want to be on the show, or just to let us know any topics that you want to hear from us. And please tune in next week to hear another amazing episode of Elaborate Topics. And until then, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.